Okay, now another thing that I want to bring to light is that although it's good to have a micro view of the suttas, it's just as important to have a macro view. What is a macro view? How authentic are our suttas? How did our suttas come down to us? And we will start off this workshop by giving you the overview, the macro view, before we go to the micro view. This is important because if you just go very micro into the suttas and have a micro view, you tend to forget the general picture, the overall picture. It's just like nowadays, we have got so many specialists, specialist centers in Malaysia, all over the world, and doctors, they specialize in a particular organ, a particular system of the body. But when you specialize too much, then you forget to look at the overall picture. That every organ and everything in the body is related to one another. Right? So it's the same for Buddhist studies, Sutta studies. Although we go into very micro details about how to interpret the suttas, it is very important to know our premises. Even though you may go very deep into the analysis of the Pali words and syntax, if your sutta is inauthentic, then you're wasting your time. Right or not? So in the first place, we have to question and to see how authentic are the suttas that we accept to be the Buddha's words. Okay, so now I'm going to start off with introducing you to the macro view, the overall view. How did we get our knowledge of the Buddha's teachings? How did the suttas come down to us? Scholars are still debating on when the Buddha actually lived and when he died. No one has really come to a consensus. But we know that he lived roughly 2,500 years or more ago. And we all know that during that time, communications was pretty bad. Nowadays we have internet, we have SMS, we have handphones, and it's very easy to communicate with one another. In those days, there was just travel by foot or by caravan, by bullock carts, and there was no means of recording what the Buddha said except through your own memory. On top of that, the Buddha was a linguist. He would speak the language or dialect of the people that he was addressing. Just imagine that the Buddha were in China and he went to Guangdong province. He would speak Cantonese. If he went to Fujian, he would speak Hokkien, right? If he went to the Hakka, the people, he would speak Hakka, and so forth. Yeah, so he would speak different dialects according to the audience that he was addressing. And there were no recorders, no video recorders, no MP3 recorders. So how could all the suttas be collected together, and compiled into what we call the tipitaka nowadays? According to tradition, it seems that a couple of months, within a year after the Buddha passed away, the monks got together and they compiled his teachings into the form that we have today, called the tipitaka, the three baskets. But I question whether this is really true, whether it's really possible. Okay, not only is it quite impossible to do that with our modern means of communication. Imagine 45 years of ministry, to be compiled together, given in different places, in the Middle Kingdom, in different dialects, and then to be selected, edited, collated, and agreed upon in terms of a common dialect to use. within 3 months. You think it's possible? It's not quite possible, isn't it? The Cantonese will say, we want it in Cantonese. All right. And then the Hokkien will say, we want it in Hokkien. Then the Hakkanese, the people will say they want it in Hakka. So how would you agree on a common dialect in order to preserve the teachings of the Buddha? Which is what we have right now in the Pali tradition. We have what we call Pali, which is not the language. Pali actually means text. The language is actually Magadhi, the language of the Magadhans. But then again, when they make excavations and archaeological and epigraphical studies, they find that there's nothing in India that is exactly like the Pali that we have in our scriptures right now. The closest is Adda Magadhi, the language that was the dialect that was used by Asoka in his rock edicts. So, this is important to understand, that whatever scriptures that we have right now may not be the authentic teachings of the Buddha. It's definitely, they are not the exact words of the Buddha. If you look at the suttas, the way they are phrased, you will know that it has been, you would say, converted into a form that can be easily remembered. You have stock passages, stock phrases, and arranged in a way that is easy for people to remember. And the Buddha would not give a talk like the way the scriptures are recorded in our books right now. Okay, so you have to bear this in mind. Now let's look at how the Dhamma Vinaya, or the Pali scriptures, came or were formed from the Buddha's time. I can only give you the version from the Pali scriptures because that's what I'm conversant in. You have other sources of the Buddha's teachings coming from Chinese, which they translated from various forms of Prakrits or Sanskrit, hybrid Buddhist Sanskrit in India. And you have also got Tibetan sources. Nowadays, because of modern communications, they have better access to all these and they can make comparative studies. Right? But I'm limited. I can only give you what the Pali scriptures say and also a bit of the translations of some of the works done by these modern scholars. According to our Pali scriptures, during the Buddha's time, he actually had certain terms to refer to his own teachings. I call it Buddha Vachana because Buddha Vachana means the Buddha's word. Well, this is only a convenient way of saying so because we don't really know exactly what the Buddha's words are. So he would normally call his teachings Dhamma Vinaya. Buddhism is an English word, and there was one Buddhist writer in England who said that the Buddha did not teach Buddhism. Buddhism came later. What he taught was the Dhamma Vinaya. What is Dhamma Vinaya? It's doctrine and discipline. Dhamma is doctrine and Vinaya is discipline, and this discipline refers mostly to monastic discipline. Sometimes also called the brahmacharya, the holy celibate life, referring to the practice of the Dhamma Vinaya by his monastic disciples. The Dhamma Vinaya can be divided into Vinaya and Dhamma. Vinaya is quite simple in terms of category. It refers only to the rules for monks and nuns. Dhamma is a bit more complicated. In the suttas themselves, the Buddha sometimes makes use of the ninefold classification of his Dhamma. The first one is called Sutta, or discourse. The second is called Geya, or mixed prose and verse. And the third is called Vyakarana, expositions. Expositions means explanations of certain doctrinal points. And then Gatha, verses. Udana, inspired utterances. This happens when the Buddha comes across a particular event or situation and then he utters usually some verses of joy. And then from there, you record all these verses and they classify it under this section. 6 is called Itivataka, thus was said, although nowadays most of the suttas start off by thus have I heard. This is thus was said by the Buddha. Jataka here is translated as what has happened, although usually people would translate it as birth stories. The word Jataka literally means what had happened. A birth story also could be something that had happened. But what had happened need not necessarily be a birth story. You get the logic? Now if you look at the Jataka Pali, you know, the Pali means the canonical Jatakas. They are very short. The first few Jatakas are only a few, one verse of 4 lines, or 2 verses with 4 lines each. And it's so succinct that it's not easy for normal people to understand. So what has been done is that the commentaries would elaborate to make it understandable, and a verse of 4 lines could be explained in 4 pages, you know, or maybe depending on the story, it may be more than 4 pages. But in the verses themselves, especially in the first few hundred Jatakas, there's nothing mentioned about the Bodhisattva. You know, the word Bodhisattva is not even found there. And there is no reference in the verses themselves as to who was who during that time. I'm sure many of you would have read Jataka stories before. If you are not teaching Jataka stories in Pali Sunday Dhamma school, perhaps you would have read yourselves. And you would notice that at the end of a Jataka story, there is a roundup. Right? Not at that time, the monkey was the Bodhisattva, was the Buddha, and then the greedy pig was so and so, and then Sariputta was the faithful disciple, and so forth. And of course, Devadatta is the evil one, the hunter. You can see all this at the end of the Jatakas, but these are not found in the Pali canon itself. These were added in by the commentaries. We can look at it this way. As I said earlier, communications during the Buddha's time was pretty poor. We didn't have any videos, no TV, no entertainment, and the only entertainment that people had was all these itinerant stage shows by acrobats and what you call players, actors, and of course also recluses, philosophers and monks. Yeah. So when they give a Dhamma talk, what is more captivating than telling a good story? Right? Not if I were to tell you about what happened during my childhood, what made me become a monk, you know, I'm sure all of you will be pricking up your ears and opening your eyes wide, listening to all the stories. That is human tendency, human nature. That's why many religious teachers make use of parables. Right? Even if you have studied the Bible before, you will know that Jesus Christ made use of a lot of parables. That's the way to captivate people's attention. The Buddha also made use of parables, but the commentators were masters of that. They can make very interesting stories, which we will come to after when we talk about the background behind the Buddha giving the Satipatthana discourse. Okay, so I would look at the Jatakas as something similar to Aesop's fables. You know, they have a moral behind them, and sometimes people would ask me, you know, some of these Jataka stories appear to be so fantastic and very unacceptable for modern mentality. So I would ask them, have you ever read a novel? Yeah? Or have you seen a movie? And you know that it's all fiction, isn't it? Novel is fiction, the movie is fiction. But when you read it, don't you feel inspired by the hero? Yeah? Don't you feel disgusted by the bad guy? Yeah, so it has an effect on you. So if you read the Jatakas and it inspires you to practice better, to be more generous, to be more forgiving, to be more patient, to be more enduring, why not? Yeah, but you find that it's a lot of unacceptable embellishments, then never mind. Put it aside, leave it aside, and go for something else that appeals to you. Okay? So that's my attitude towards Jataka. It's not really important whether it really happened or not, the way the commentators tell us. What is more important is what effect it has on you. Does it help you to promote and develop more wholesome states of mind and action, or otherwise? Number 8 is Abhuta Dhamma, marvelous things. Right, marvelous things, things about, for example, the Bodhisattva in his last birth, when he came out from his mother's womb, he began to walk 7 steps, all these marvelous, miraculous things. And things about when the Buddha released his life formation, that means gave up the will to live, and when he actually left this world, a lot of miraculous things happen. Vedala is a catechism, Q&A. This is done not only between the Buddha and somebody else, but also among monks or among bhikkhunis and a lay person. There's one very famous Vedala Sutta called the Chula Vedala. The very highly attained bhikkhuni by the name of Aye Dhammadina answered some very, very profound questions asked by a lay disciple called Visakha. Visakha is not the female, this one is a male Visakha. According to the commentary, we don't know how true it is, they were husband and wife before. And until later when she left to become a nun and she became an arahant, and she left to become a nun because the husband became an anagami after listening to a Dhamma talk by the Buddha, and after that his behavior changed drastically. And that caused her to renounce to become a bhikkhuni, and she became an arahant, while the husband, Visakha, remained an anagami in day life. So it was supposed to be a conversation between the two of them, and maybe the husband was trying to check her meditation practice. And he asked very profound questions, and she answered in a very, very commendable way, which the Buddha himself lauded. Okay, so the Dhamma Vinaya that was taught by the Buddha according to the Pali scriptures can be classified in these 9 different classifications. Then, shortly after the Buddha passed away, according to the Pali scriptures account in the Culavagga, which is the 4th book of the Vinaya Pitaka, the 4th book of the basket of discipline for monks, there is a chronology of events. Usually the Pali scriptures don't talk about chronology, but this one, there's a chronology of events that happened after the Buddha passed away, and how this first Sangiti, sometimes called the first council, was formed. Actually, Sangiti means choral chanting. Giti is chanting or singing. In fact, there's a sutta called Sangiti Sutta in the Digha Nikaya, which is about chanting together the teachings of the Buddha. So in the first choral chanting, the first Sangiti, that was held shortly after the Buddha's parinibbana, according to the Pali scriptures, Bhante Mahakassapa, who was then the senior-most monk, convened that Sangiti, and he asked Bhante Ananda about the Dhamma, and he asked Bhante Upali about the Vinaya. Now, when he asked Bhante Upali, he asked him about the Ubato Vibhanga, which is both analysis. These are the terms that are used in the Culavagga itself. And what are the analysis? Bhikkhu Vibhanga, analysis of monks' rules, and Bhikkhuni Vibhanga, analysis of nuns' rules. Because nowadays you all have heard that monks have got about 227 precepts to follow, right? I think many people have that idea. But these are just the major precepts. There are actually thousands of other minor precepts. So the analysis of the monks' rules is like a law book. You know, for example, there's one rule which says that a monk is, should a monk take what is not given, you know, then that entails a parajika, a defeat, which means that he's no longer a monk. And then he will define what is meant by a monk, what is meant by taking what is not given, how much would that amount to, what is the minimum limit, cost of the thing that has been taken stealthily by the monk without permission, right? And what is meant by stealthily, and so forth. You know, it's a definition of each of the terms that are found in that rule, very much like a law book. So it's analysis of monks' rules. It also comes with a background story. What were the circumstances that made the Buddha lay down this rule? So a similar analysis is given for the bhikkhunis' rules. As for the Dhamma, Bhante Mahakassapa questioned Bhante Ananda on the circumstances behind each sutta. This particular sutta, where was it discussed by the Buddha, on account of whom or what circumstances? And then Asmananda would start off by saying, Evang me suttang, thus was heard by me. His perception of what had happened and what the sutta is all about. Then at the end of which, the Culavagga says, in this way, Bhante Mahakassapa asked Bhante Ananda about the 5 nikayas. Full stop. All right? There was no elaboration on what the 5 nikayas were. And the word nikaya is not even found in the tipitaka. This is the first time that it is used in that sense. What is found in the tipitaka, very curiously, is the word agama. You all know what's agama? You know, in Chinese it's called ahang. You know, ahan jing. You know, that is the agama. But in the Sanskrit version of the Chinese, they don't say the 5 nikayas, they say the 5 agamas. But we don't know why, in the Pali tradition, instead of using the word agamas, they invented this word nikaya. Okay, anyway, this word nikaya is first found, nikayas referring to the collection of the Buddha's teachings, is found in the Culavagga. And nothing is mentioned about what these 5 collections are. But now we know these 5 collections to be the Digha Nikaya, the long collection, the Majjhima Nikaya, the middle collection, the Samyutta Nikaya, the connected collection, Anguttara Nikaya, the numerical collection, and finally Khuddaka Nikaya, the minor collection. Let me explain. The first 2 are classified according to the length of the discourse. If a discourse is very long, then you will all be put under this collection. If it's of a middle length, you will be put under the second collection. The third one is classified according to subject matter. If it's about Satipatthana, then all the suttas about Satipatthana will be put under one Sangyutta called Satipatthana Sangyutta. Yeah? If it's about dependent origination, then all will be collected and put under the section called Nidana Sangyutta, about causes and conditions, and so forth. Then the fourth is numerical collection. This is classified according to the number of points that the Buddha talked about. If he talks about, let's say, the 3 characteristics, 3 points, right? That will be under the Book of Trees. If he talks about the Four Noble Truths, it could be under the Book of Force. If he talks about the 7 factors of enlightenment, then it could be under the Book of 7. Right? So these are classified according to numbers, the number of points that is dealt with by the Buddha in his discourse. Number 5 is the minor collection, which is none of the above. Whatever that cannot fit into the other 4, they put it under here. But now it has become the largest collection because people kept on adding more and more things in it. Even the Abhidhamma is now classified under Khuddaka Nikaya, under the minor collection. Now you will see that here nothing is mentioned about the Abhidhamma, right? Although nowadays the commentaries try to put the Abhidhamma under number 5, Khuddaka Nikaya, as a minor collection. But they are altogether 7 books of the Abhidhamma, very voluminous. Anyway, why do they have to classify it according to collections? Well, because this is a good way of trying to preserve the Buddha's teachings. As I said, there were no recorders, no video recorders, no MP3 recorders. They didn't even make use of paper or stone to preserve their teachings. Everything was done by memory. And it's easy for the first few monks, because the Buddha only taught a few suttas at the beginning, right? Easy for the first few monks because there were so few vinaya rules. But at the end of 45 years, you can imagine then the accumulation of suttas and accumulation of vinaya rules that has come about through these 45 years. So the monks are the people who preserve the teachings of the Buddha, but they also need to meditate and practice, right? If they spend the whole time trying to memorize and recite the sutta, they wouldn't have any time for meditation. So what they do is that they divide their labor. Okay, they have one, they form a group of monks and say, okay, you are in charge of Digha Nikaya. You only memorize Digha Nikaya, that's your job. And then another group, your job is just to memorize the Majjhima Nikaya and transmit it from one generation to another. So that's how they divided their labor. And that's the reason why we take refuge in the Sangha. Without the Sangha, would we know anything about Buddhism? Nothing, right? We wouldn't know anything about Buddhism because it was lay people were so busy with their own lay obligations. Even nowadays, although lay people have more time, very much more time than those people during the Buddha's era, still many lay people don't have the time to really study the suttas, not to talk about memorizing them, and actually teach the suttas. There are a few exceptions. Yeah, Brother Tan Ho Soon is one of them. And you have Uncle Vijaya and a few other people, but they are very rare. Okay, so this was the classification supposedly done soon after the Buddha passed away. Then about 100 years after that, there were some problems among the monastics. The monks disagreed on the interpretation and practice of some minor vinaya rules, and that led to a very big dispute, and it ended up in another Sangiti, another choral chanting. And this choral chanting is called Vinaya Sangiti, which means that it's a choral chanting of the vinaya rules. You know, after the dispute about the 10 points of controversy was settled, then the elder monks got together, got a few hundred monks together, and they recited the Vinaya together in unison to sort of ratify or confirm or verify the authenticity of the Vinaya rules. But nothing is mentioned about the Dhamma being recited, only the Vinaya. So I'm not considering this. 100 years later, that means 200 years after the Buddha passed away, there was a third Sangiti. And this third Sangiti was held during the Asoka's time. Emperor Asoka became a Buddhist, and he was so faithful and was so supportive that he incurred the jealousy of non-Buddhist practitioners. And not only that, because the Bhikkhu Sangha was so well supported, many of these other non-Buddhist renunciants couldn't get enough support. You know, and so many of them joined the Buddhist Sangha, not because they embraced Buddhist teachings, but they wanted an easy life. Right? So although they wore robes, they did not observe the precepts well enough. Some of them even committed the parajikas. They were no longer monks, but they refused to leave the order, and they were impersonating as monks. Now there's one rule for monks. It states that on Uposatha Day, to be done every fortnight, on every full moon and new moon day, monks are supposed to gather in a sima and to recite the Patimokkha, the Vinaya, the code of monastic discipline. But they can only do so when everybody is pure. Now, if there are impure monks among them, or monks who are not real ones, they are not genuine, bogus monks, they cannot do it. All right? So there were some pure monks there who realized that there were bogus monks among themselves. So they didn't want to attend the Uposatha ceremony. When Emperor Asoka came to know about this, he was very upset, and he wanted to see the Sangha in harmony and in unity. So he gave an order to his men to make sure that the Sangha resumed their Uposatha, because the Uposatha was suspended. That was what he said. And then his military officers took the law in their own hands and executed those monks who refused to participate. These were the good monks, and the monks who were there in the Siva were mostly bogus monks. So the good monks were executed. And when King Asoka came to know about it, he was so, upset, even more upset, and full of grief. And so he consulted the Sangha elders to ask what to do now, such a thing has happened. And then the Sangha elders advised him to invite one very revered, meditative, and very learned monk who was staying up in the mountains, called Bante Moguliputta, to come down and convene to do a check on all the monks. It's just like now we have got this 6P program, right? So the illegal immigrants, will have to register and then go for interview. All right. So in the same way, all the monks had to go for interview. And this is Bante Moguliputta will be staying in the palace, at one corner of the palace, where the monks will file in and be interviewed by him. And then you'll be divided by a screen. On the other side of the screen were Asoka's men waiting with a pile of white clothing. So when they fail the interview, they'll be asked to disrobe. They'll be given a set of white clothing and go off without wearing the monk's robes. Okay, that's the way King Asoka purified the Sangha. Okay, so at the end of that purification process, they convened the third Sangiti, right, to recite again the words of the Buddha. But we don't really know when this new classification came about. It may be during that time, it may be after that time. But modern scholars in their research are saying that about 200 years after the Buddha passed away, the scriptures were still in the process of being collated, being compiled, not yet finalized. Yeah, and so somewhere in this time or later, these 5 nikayas came to be classified as the Sutta Pitaka, discourses. And the vinaya was put under the Vinaya Pitaka. And then they introduced the Abhidhamma Pitaka. It's about, Pitaka is basket, the basket of metaphysics, basket of discourses, basket of discipline. Now we don't know why they use the word basket, because at that time these things were not written down yet. It was when you use the word basket, you can imagine why it's called a basket, because the earliest form of recording the Buddha's teachings were in ola leaves, palm leaves, and the palm leaves have to be stored in baskets, right or not? So modern scholars say that the first writing of the scriptures came in the 1st century BC, before the Common Era, BCE. So that's about more than 200 years after the Buddha passed away, maybe 400 years after the Buddha passed away. So the word tipitaka cannot be found in the Tipitaka, ironically. And it's possible that the word tipitaka was invented after the teachings were recorded in ola leaves and were stored in baskets. So this is called the 3 baskets.